You are now listening to the Here for the Truth podcast, hosted by Joel Rafidi and Yerasimos.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Here for the Truth. I'm Joel Rafidi. Yerasimos is with me, as always. Just a disclaimer and a reminder, we don't claim to possess the truth. We're here for the truth. We are on our own truth discovery process. Throughout all these conversations that we have, we don't necessarily agree with every single comment and perspective all our guests share, but we choose to have active minds in the process and use our discerning faculties as best as we possibly can to separate truth from falsity. And on this topic in particular, we do intend to have a broad range of conversations with a wide array of perspectives that will challenge our own views and yours as well. But as any good truth seeker would, the intention is to deeply contemplate without dismissing and use the differences in understanding to continue to fuel our own journeys and broaden our own capacity to stand between the tension of opposites as we all stumble our way up the mountain. Remember, ensure at all times that your mind alone is the final arbiter of truth, and always place the onus on yourself to confirm and clarify anything before accepting it as fact. Please enjoy this episode. All right, everyone, welcome back to the Here for the Truth podcast. We have the great Michael Tsarion returning. This is his fourth time on our podcast. He first joined us on episode 78, Unslaved, episode 102, Observations of Female Psychology, episode 121, where we explored archetypes and the origins of consciousness. He's the co-host of the Unslaved podcast alongside our good friend David Whitehead. Throughout his career, Michael's gone through great lengths to bring the truth to the forefront in all the areas of research specific to him, including the occult, conspiracy, psychology, philosophy, and more. He's a key reason that Yerasimos and I are even connected, and can't recommend his work enough. MichaelTsarion.com or unslaved.com. We highly recommend everyone go check out those two websites. Michael, welcome back.
Oh, thanks, guys. Lovely to see you. And a big thanks for bringing me on again. So great to be part of this.
Oh, man, it's an absolute pleasure every time that we get to connect and have these conversations and dispel some myths. And obviously, we find ourselves in very intense and precarious times once again. And today, we're going to be looking at the rise of this idea of a Jewish super conspiracy, which seems to be making a return today as we speak, as well as shedding some light on who might be at the root of the manipulation that we see taking place all around us. So, Michael, however you want to begin this one, let's get into it.
Well, it's difficult when we place the blame on just the Jewish conspiracy. That's where I would already have a bit of a problem, because that is based largely on a lot of disinformation that's been going along in this movement. It's sort of endemic in this movement. I myself started that way years ago, and have some fantastic teachers that I read and studied, and because it's a vast subject. I've written extensively on it, going into the ancient history of those we call the Jews to uncover that, moving up to, the role in secret societies, and then, of course, up to the founding of Israel and on from that. But the article that, you wanted to discuss with me and others on that website are a little bit of a change. And that is because I did the unthinkable. When you are first introduced to this concept of a Jewish universal world conspiracy number, and you're reading the advocates of it, some of them are very interesting people. You can see that some of them are also very, very genuine. But when you are going along that road, you start to get more and more dogmatic. Maybe this happens even when you don't realize it. And so one of the great failings of people who look at the conspiracy from that point of view and just blame Jews is that they have never studied a far more interesting and intriguing subject, and that is the history of anti-Semitism. As I proceeded researching the anti-Semitic writers and absorbing in detail everything they had to say, and also contradictions between them, because, they're not, You got British Israelitism. I don't know if we can even touch on that. You've got the neo-Nazism and a lot of other little, sort of nuances when it comes to the Jewish conspiracy. You've even got Benjamin Freeman and Arthur Koestler. You've got the Khazar story. You see? So it takes a devil of a time to even get your arms around the information that constitutes the so-called Jewish universal conspiracy and to work it all out, because it's multifaceted. You've got the Diana Sprangolas, others I mentioned. You got your David Dukes. So there's a lot, and we've even had guests on Enslaved that, approach things from that point of view. But then, just like yourselves, what we wanted to do is also get other voices on that counterpoint that, which I think is just healthy for any podcast anyway, to present our audience with, both sides of the story. And we've been ridiculed for that. And I just don't think people are very open-minded. But to get back to the point, as I started to get my arms around all of this information, I am a person who notices a lot of contradictions. But also I'm a person who would continually read the opposite side. Mm-hmm. Whether you found that in a bibliography of one of these books or just an independent book, or, this is what research does, you see. If you're a real researcher, that is, you come across information that doesn't fit your dogma, then most people just leave it aside. Well, I don't. I bring it into the mix immediately. And what that led me up to then was to say, as I'm studying this material, this literature that speaks of a Jewish conspiracy, I'm also going to do the unthinkable. And that is to study the history of anti-Semitism at the same time, mm-hmm. to see where that would lead. And that became, as time went by, more fascinating, actually, as a subject. I'm totally looking at things from an unbiased point of view. And so from a scholastic point of view, I just found that subject to be more interesting and found out how ancient it is. Now, this is not to exonerate conspiratorial Jews or pseudo-Jews. These would be people like the Sabbateans and the Frankists, people that I deal with in that article. Yep. And a whole slew of other, say the Bolshevik Revolution, things like that. The world bankers. You can tell me they don't exist, and they've all got, many of them have Jewish names. Absolutely. But see, the anti-Semite leaves it there. He doesn't think to himself that if I am going to find out that there's a phenomena known as Catholic pedophile priests, which there obviously is, do I indict all of Catholics mm-hmm. in the world because of that? Or because I find out that the Shankill butchers in Northern Ireland did some atrocities on the Protestant side, in the Protestant enclaves of Belfast, that now suddenly all Orange men and all Protestants are automatically to be demonized? No. Nobody's ever thought that, and nobody sane ever would. But why is it that when some people with Jewish names, George Soros, whatever, right, do things that are clearly wrong, or Henry Kissinger, pick with whoever you want, that now I should automatically pillory everybody who's Jewish? That's the general anti-Semitic way, almost without fail. They all do this. And so then, to finish the overview remarks here, this took me on a vast journey, because when you start to understand the history of this subject called anti-Semitism, it takes you right back to ancient Egypt, to the destruction of the first temple of Jerusalem, to the destruction of the second temple, to other extraordinary events that happened in ancient times. So, I had to put those articles somewhere. And so they ended up on the Female Illuminati website in context mm-hmm. of that subject, because most Jews don't know anything about their own history. They too believe only what they've been told about their ancestry. And so, it all fit. And also the double volumes of Irish Origins Civilization, Trees of Life book. There's been a lot of work that I've done on this to unpack the ancient roots of the subject. And then, as you move up towards today, It takes on a slightly different complexion, when we reach the modern world, and it's absolutely labyrinthine. And then in May, we just did a podcast called Princes of Light, based on the last article I did, which people can find there on the Female Illuminati site as well. Right up to the present day, we've been turning it around again and uncovering it and looking at the data again, just like a good forensic detective does. You bring it out again, lay it out again, one more time, sidelight it, get other people's opinion, review what you've done. And obviously then my conclusion, I'd be an error not to mention it, is that I no longer believe in a universal worldwide Jewish conspiracy. So we can take it up from that point.
Yep. Yeah. Well, these times that, we're seeing intensify around us now, just based on my observations and what I'm seeing within the collective, there definitely seems to be this seething, unconscious desire to basically paint and tarnish all Jews with the same brush. And the moment events occur that, might prompt people's preconditioned cognitive biases, it's all out attack. It becomes no holds barred when it comes to, pushing this so-called Jewish conspiracy. So I'm very curious as to what's underlying the underbelly of the collective psychology that gives rise to this.
Yeah, and also why the Jewish people seem to be painted with the same brush, whereas the Catholics and the Irish, haven't. So I'm curious, why that is.
Yeah, and just to bring in the other side, when I read the remarks and the commentary, I think a lot of it has to do with the disproportionate number of Jews in positions of high power, whether it's in the media, whether it's in the politics, or whatever it might be. This seems to imbue this idea in the remarks and in the commentary.
Yes, well, that certainly, let's start with that then, because that has to be absolutely key. And you don't have to be anti-Semitic to notice that. Mm-hmm. One glance at the Bolshevik Revolution, one glance at the older Ottoman Empire, and how it was top heavy with Jews, crypto Jews at that point. So somebody who had studied this, and of course, if you look into the early banksters of the United States, you see some Jewish names. Let's put it that way. There's enough to be worrisome. You know what I mean? So yes, how does one account for that? The thing with that to understand is my research, and I can only talk from that, is to show you that they're not Jews. They have Jewish names. That's about as far as it goes. And that sounds extremely bizarre and contradictory, unless you know the history of this anti-Semitism and some of the things that went on, not just the history of anti-Semitism, but the history of Judaism. The whistle was blown, you see, in the 17th century by Jewish elders and Jewish rabbis, that there was amongst their group Satanists, what we would now call Satanists, out-and-out Satanists, who had risen up within their movement and also within other movements, not just Judaism, and they were abroad in the Middle East and Europe. Think of Sabbatai Zevi or Sabbatai Zevi for just one example. And he was caught, captured, arrested, probably tortured or whatever, and to get out of it, he converted to Islam. But about 100 years later, Jakob Frank did exactly the same thing. He rose up as a Messianic Jew, trying to fool the Jewish people, which is easy to do back then because nobody was literate. And the Jews were always sixth-class citizens. We think we know third class is pretty rough. Try being a Jew in history. And so when a Messianic character, quoting some old verses from the Talmud or the Torah, rose up, and this would be Jakob Frank. There's been many others, actually, but let's leave that aside. I deal with some of them in the Irish Origins book. But Jakob Frank jumped up. He was roasted. He was caught. And he converted to Judaism, to Christianity. Zevi converted to Islam to escape death under the Sultan, who gave him a choice, convert, and we can parade you around. It's good to have converts that are living, because then, it's better than just putting you to death where you become a martyr and your followers go ape shit. We don't want that. And something happened along the same lines with Frank. And this will get to the heart of your question. So not only did those two guys convert, one to Islam and the other to Christianity, all of their followers, which were considerable, also converted. And so the rabbis and the elders were very suspicious of this. We'll just talk about Judaism for now.
Mm-hmm.
And they put out warnings that your anti-Semitic writers and the vast majority of Christian writers never want to tell you or mention because it upsets the apple cart. And that is, the word went out to almost all the communities of Europe and the Middle East to watch out for this satanic element. Now, we're talking about the real Satanist element here, not what, Christian evangelists and their mega churches are talking about. We're talking about the real thing. And they said that these Satanists were now amongst us. So please, communities, be careful. Know your Torah well, because there's subversion there. And this was an ongoing thing in the Jewish world. We're never taught about it. And then on the practical level, it meant that these Satanists were alive and broad within Judaism and could use Jewish fronts, Jewish names, and Jewish institutions to purvey their evil. So this is what's been going on. And this is a very, very powerful group, because any time you camouflage yourself, it's fantastic. The tiger in the long grass. And this would only be 2 conversions that I can think of. There were several others. And one maybe we can get to, which is the most important conversion, which involves the Knights Templar. But so the ones that you find at the Bolshevik Revolution, your Moses Hesses and your Parvises and your Trotskys and people like that, the ones who are the big world movers, and there's Trotsky who invented the word racism, so that anytime anybody uses that, and we know that these commies are the ones who then pervade a lot of the dogma of being oppressed, the dogma of being an underdog, and having capitalist oppressors and all of this kind of language. And, if we study the history of Islam, you'll find out that it is in the Islamic world that this kind of rhetoric became popular in 1967. Before that, Islam's raison d'etre or mandate was sort of shy of that. And you never heard such terms being used. But after 1967, you not only got the Islam world starting to speak in communistic red and pinko language, but you also got it in America in the form of pluralism and feminism and multiculturalism and what have you. All of this communist rhetoric from Trotsky and the communists entering in. It's just an interesting fact, right? And so arose a phenomena, not just of anti-Semitism, but of left-wing anti-Semitism. That's another piece that, you have to have in place. I prefer to call it islamo-communism, in which, but that would date from the time of the communist period. But what people don't realize is this kind of socialism that we know from 1917 and the Bolshevik Revolution had been in the world until before, even back in the 17th century, and a lot longer before that. So this type of socialism actually originates with the fourth sect, going back to the earliest days in before the birth of Jesus' own family, and then you can track that as well up until the 17th century. It went through really great changes. So there's this left-wing element as well, and what the experts say on that is that not only are these these pseudo-Jews, the ones that you're talking about when you speak about or identify a Jewish conspiracy, but they tend to be very left-wing. Mm-hmm. And on the lightest level, being left-wing just means that you're for the oppressor. But what we're finding out today, which has enormous ramifications for history, is that actually it's Islam's forces that are the most vehement left-wingers attacking Israel. And it is the left wing in America and Britain in the form of LGBTQ and transgender and left wing, right, and communists that seem to be strangely backing Islam. How the hell can that marriage be explained unless you do the homework that I'm talking about?
Yeah,
which is the history of Judaism and the history of anti-Semitism.
Yeah, well, I mean, when you say that, Soros definitely comes to mind, who to me is an individual who's purely Jewish by name only. All other actions would point to the fact that he despises Judaism, and we know that he's involved with funding many of these left-wing groups that you mentioned.
Oh, yes, that's right. And so this originates far, far beyond the known history with a group called the Nazarenes, also known as the Fourth Sect, and even before that. Let me give you one example. When I said the 1700s, it is well known that Super Jew Moses Mendelssohn is the main funder of the Illuminati. But he was a Jacobin. He supported the revolution in France, the Reign of Terror. You can't get any more left wing. So I'm a bit confused here. And he was a friend of the Rothschilds. So obviously, right there, your anti-Semite he's out of it. He cannot explain that. Mm-hmm. And this is just one example. How can a multi-millionaire super Jew who's known to be a founder of the Illuminati, and he was a Jacobin, a supporter of the French Revolution, which is about as left-wing as you can get, an anti-monarchic, an anti-capitalist, an anti-individualistic. How can that even be? That's in the 1700s. Well, it can be because of exactly what I'm talking about. Left-wing anti-Semitism. And Jews can be a member of it. The psychology of which, as I've already mentioned, I identify with the underdog. Well, right, if you're stupid, then you will. But you can be Jewish and stupid. Mm-hmm. And also because the Jews, as I just already said, were sixth-class citizens for most of their sojourn in any country in the world for thousands of years. Of course they're going to see themselves as underdogs. Climbing out of that, well, I don't even know if you can. Even if you're a millionaire Jew, you might still, in your mind, and you and your family, still be thinking of yourselves as well-to-do Jews, but still as relative underdogs in terms of the world. And so would I. Because when Gentiles, in the world of Gentiles for 2,000 years, Gentiles had the freedom, relative freedom, to make money, for instance, we're just talking economics here, in any which way that they wanted. Whereas Jews were highly restricted in how they could earn money. So when people blame them of being moneylenders, they forget that the way that a Jew could make money, serious money, was so limited by the powers and edicts of the towns and the villages and the cities in which he lived, that it's a miracle that he made money at all. This is important because, of course, in order to run a worldwide conspiracy, you need ready cash and lots of it. Well, as I've shown in my work, the Jews didn't have ready cash and lots of it until a very late date. And that many of the great Jewish fortunes were lost time and time again. They had to rebuild it through thrift and capitalism. And that on the other side, the great families of Germany, France, Europe, whatever, they had maintained their wealth and their fortune. Now, one of the great advocates of this, one of the great thinkers on this is Ayn Rand, who had completely understood about most of the things we're talking about. And luckily, on her institute today, you can go, I post on the blog all the time about this, but this will be the Michael Tsarion blog on Unslaved. It's under the free section of Unslaved. But if you go to her, right to her YouTube page, Ayn Rand Institute, there are thinkers there who go into a little bit of this history to show you this. And mostly what she cracked was this left-wing infiltration. And it's a, we couldn't go into it in one podcast, but if you had to do it in one sentence, you'd just say that, look, in 1989, when the communists knew that they were finished in terms of the exoteric Bolshevik phase in Russia, in Soviet Russia, they realized that they had to revamp, right? I hesitate there because actually, no, you should really go back to the date after the war. 89 is correct, but there's even before this, there's an event that took place, and that concerns the Nazis. When the Nazi experiment was over, this would be after 1945, and the years just following that, they realized that they were going to lose. Now, we know, or you should know, that the Nazis are socialists. You've dealt with that on your show, haven't you? You know that. Most people in the whole wide world don't know that, and still the penny hasn't dropped for them, but we know that. So but what's not told you is this, that when the Nazis realized that the game was up, some of the real honchos, the ones who were the ideologues, started to covet Islam. They actually moved. They actually started living with the sultans of Egypt and Jordan, and also in Saudi Arabia and other Muslim countries. And they were greeted. Maybe we can get to the reason why that was in a minute. Exactly the same thing happened in 1989 when the communists, now we're talking about Nazis and communists being basically socialists, they're the same, they're not as diverted as people think. Bear that in mind. So when the communist experiment started to look like it was fading out, there was going to be a change, and there was no longer this bilateral division in the world. It was going to become unipolar with the Americas being in charge. Guess what they did? They followed suit. They followed the Nazis and started to cause it with Islam. And in these two phases, taken together, amount to the rise of islamo-communism. So it is Islam today that is communistic and fascistic, or Nazi. The Nazis went and became ideologues in the Islamic world, and the communists did likewise. What a cocktail. This has never been told to you by mainstream writers or sound. They couldn't dream of having you know this.
Yeah.
But this was facilitated by Hitler himself, who had the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem lived in Germany during the war and was working with Hitler, the Grand Mufti of Islam, living in Jerusalem. And other dignitaries from the Islamic world stayed in Germany during the Second World War, worked closely with Hitler in order to form SS brigades in the Middle East. They came to Hitler because they had one thing in common, which was how do we get rid of the Jews? So the Nazis, who had already been working on that plan in Germany, as we all know, right, said, by God, we've got an ally here. And that alliance didn't fade, as history wants you to know. Far from it. In fact, Islam became the new home of the card-carrying Nazis. You've heard about the rat line in which the Vatican helped certain head honchos within Nazism escape. And that's all true. One can get into that. But that is openly admitted by writers, Operation Paperclip and what have you, right? But what has not been so easily revealed is this Nazi connection to Islam. But what Islam has known for years, what the Western world has not even labored until now, and that is to know that that Nazism is socialism. And it turned out that the Islamic world has been interested in socialism long before Nazism came on the scene. The rulers of the Ottoman Empire were not only Jewish, and one of the first podcasts we ever did on Unslaved goes into this. I think it was maybe it might have even been number 1 or 2, something like that, really early on, right? But, well, yeah, we see, let's put it this way. While the Nazi Party in the 1930s was gaining power in Europe, simultaneously in the East, and this includes even India, everything I'm saying pertains even to the rise of communism in India, which is a subject very few people know about, how utterly Marxist that country it was and remains. Okay, but the focal point for us right now is the Middle East, is the dying Ottoman Empire. At this period, unknowns to most people, there was what is known as the Pan-Turkic movement. And you can look it up. And when you look it up even on Wikipedia, it has a little red flag. Wow. Wikipedia has these little images on there. Look up also, while you're doing that, Pan-Arabic movement. And it'll have a little red flag beside it. Look up Young Turks. Look up Young Italy. Look up Young Ireland. And look up Young Russia. And you will find something that pertains immensely to what we're talking about. That these lands, the old guard was basically perishing. And the youth of these countries, and we'll just stick here to Turkey and Arabia. Can you believe it? The youth had been watching what was taking place in Russia at the time of the Bolshevik Revolution and started to identify with the left wing. as it started to, its genesis. How many people have told you this? One wouldn't even see how, on paper, if you just go with what you know, how Islam, right? And we're thinking here Quran and Orthodox, Shiitism or whatever you want to call it. It just doesn't seem to fit, right?
Well, this is one of my questions is like, what are some, I guess, modern day examples that people can look to see this Islamo-communism prevalent today?
Well, it's in everything today. It's in the streets. And exactly as I said, where these transgender people and the left wing all over the world in America are supporting Islam. It's why Islam is in the news right now.
Mm-hmm.
This fascist Islam, right? The Muslim Brotherhood, it got infiltrated, right? Islam was being infiltrated by Bolsheviks, by communists. They turned the heads of the young and formed these movements all over the world. Young Ireland is the genesis of all of the Republican movements in Ireland. Young Italy with Garibaldi and Giuseppe Mazzini, it's incredible. But very few people know that you had it in the Far East. You had it in Iraq. You had it in Iran. In some places it was suppressed and they went back to traditional things, but not all. And so, in fact, I think it was out of the 5 great leaders of the Ottoman Empire, these crypto-Jews, all 3 of them were so left-wing that when the Ottoman Empire finally did fall, this is just around about after the time of the Second World War, 3 of them fled to Russia into the hands of the Soviets to escape punishment. Unbelievable. Ran to the Soviets where they'd been getting support and guns and everything like that, right? There's just proof of that. So this left wing, as I said, when the communist world fell, or apparently fell in 1989, the thinkers and the ideologues said, we're not giving up any more than the Nazis had said that back in 1945. So in 1989, a marriage in hell was made, where the communists just simply moved east and entered into the Muslim Brotherhood and behind the terrorist organizations that are now raising their heads through Hamas and Hezbollah and innumerable others. And the West let it happen.
Is there a relationship between these pseudo-Jews or crypto-Jews and this Islamo-communism movement?
Well, yeah, that's what it was all about.
Yeah.
That because of the communist rhetoric that you see in Islam about we are the oppressed people. That's all communist rhetoric, or the Jews are racist. And all of this verbiage, this wasn't in their lexicon originally. It came in after 1967.
So what happened in 67? Because I know, I guess, what comes to mind is that the 6-Day War happened in 67. But what else happened in 67 to, I guess, bridge this communism into Islam?
Oh, that was after, it happened after the Jews got Israel. Because now the rhetoric could change for the local farmers there, the pig-ignorant Palestinians who are so hated by even other Islamic countries around them. That's another thing that's been suppressed from you. That's why they're not accepted into any other land. Did you ever question why even today refugees from Gaza are not being accepted into nearby Egypt or Jordan or Syria? Because what they're not telling you is that Islam has divides that you can't even imagine. And one of the biggest divides is that the Palestinians are considered such rabble. They're considered like we would today think of anarchists or BLM or Antifa, and worse. And so other Egyptian countries always come up with some scam story to not let them in. But back to your point, it was easy to let those types of purple believe that the Jews had come in to oppress them. As I say, this communist group start to move in on the Palestinians. And your Hezbollahs are the young men, as I keep saying, who actually fell for this tripe, right? The ne'er-do-wells, the poverty-stricken, the ones who have no homeland. They saw the Jews as oppressors. And the main reason why local Arabs and Islamic people were incensed that the Sultan should sell Palestine, and by the way, that's another point. It was bought by Jews. It was never invaded, and there's no such thing as occupied territories. That's all media lies. It was purchased, and the land was purchased sometimes at extraordinarily hiked prices, way beyond what the Sultan had allowed. That means that local Palestinian people now selling their land would hike the price to Jews about 8 times. I'll get all the facts on this from the most eminent scholars. And so dirty, filthy marshland that wasn't worth anything, they hiked up their land prices and the Jews still paid it. So the Jews have paid not only once for the land that they're on, they paid like up to 8 times the price that it was worth for the land they're on. But the media will never tell you that. But to answer your question, it was easy to get in there as these Nazi groups, fascist groups, and communist groups came into the Middle East, started to train and teach through schools and through other propaganda these young men in the Islamic kingdom, in the Islamic world, who were gullible enough to fall for this, not realizing Nazism is what they're chewing on here. They're becoming the new Nazi world. But then the communists came in, and we know they're the same anyway, with their rhetoric of the underdog. But to get to your answer, that doesn't stop some left-wing Jews from doing the same thing. Because the Jews, as I said, have been underdogs themselves for centuries. And so some very uninformed, stupid Jews, right, on the left, also bought the narrative. This is, sickening and complicated. It's sickening that Islamic people should have followed communism, and they've had the people from within Islam warn them not to do so, but they don't listen. And it's sickening that Jews within the Jewish community have also fallen for the left wing. The real enemy right here is left wing politics, found in Islam, found in Judaism, found in Christianity, found in atheism. It's the contaminatory force, and its history goes back, as I say, to the fourth sect, all the way back a long history. But you see, when you see the fall of the Bolshevik system in Russia, when you see the fall of Nazism, we tend to believe it just disappeared and all you'd have is just wreckage. No. What history does not tell you, doesn't want you to know, is that these ideologues had already put out tentacles, sent their best propagandists into the Islamic world. Also some Jews. And of course, as we've already said, from the 17th century, the Jews had already had a left-wing element, a satanic element within it. Obviously, then you can see that it is their descendants who get behind the left-wing political movements of today, who queers marching for Islam and all sorts of kooky groups. Don't think that they're actually representing Judaism or Israel. They're not. This is the thing that has to be understood. So hopefully maybe, we've cleared that a little bit up, which deals with modern times. But there's a long history to anti-Semitism, and it takes all sorts of forms. And this is one of them.
What role did Karl Marx play in all this?
He was a prime mover. He is one of probably the poster children for left-wing anti-Semitism. He wrote a book called On the Jewish Question, which is the Bible. I'm glad you brought up his name, Erasmus. He wrote the Bible on left-wing anti-Semitism. You also remember a document that people might know, the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, right? Mm-hmm. Have you ever heard of that?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That was another Bible written by the same left-wing anti-Semitic Jews. In order, because how do I usually explain this? Just because a wolf might wear sheep's clothing doesn't mean that he likes sheep. So the infiltrators of Judaism don't necessarily like ordinary Jewish people, but that's an understatement. They hate them. These groups that infiltrated Christianity, Islam, and Judaism have no love for the people, that are providing them the camouflage. So the Protocols of the Elders of Zion were a deviation of the anti-Semitic group to bring mayhem to Jews, which it did. It came out of Russia because, and here's another anecdote that most people don't know, of all the countries in the world that are the most anti-Semitic, Russia is number one. Germany is way down the list. Austro-Hungary was more anti-Semitic, but the number one, it shows how history is skewed. The Jews were more free in Germany than they ever were. In fact, Otto von Bismarck, freed them from all restrictions, and Germany flourished. But from the dawn of time till today, the most anti-Semitic country was and is Russia. This will not be told to you. So it's not a surprise that the Protocols of the Elders of Zion came out from the Russian secret police. It's not authentic at all. It's purely anti-Semitic. And it is there to bring pogroms and horror on the Jews. Now, other countries have done similar acts of anti-Semitic attacks, just like Russia, I'm saying, but let's cover that for just a minute if I could. And that is because of all the kinds of ways that the Jews were allowed to make money, one of them was money lending. Because it's forbidden in Islam, and it's forbidden by the Bible and Christianity, stupidly. So when people come after the Jews for usury, what they fail to understand is that their own forefathers climbed out of the slime. We're talking Gentiles here, right? We're talking about feudal people who were considered by the barons as lowly as the cattle and the pigs that they raised for the barons. And that one of the only ways out for your forefathers and mine to become anything at all in their own lives, like open a shop or open a stable or open a livery company or, a watchmaking enterprise or cartography or writing letters for people, any of these businesses were facilitated by usury. The anti-Semitic writer doesn't know anything about this and will never concede this. But it is through being able to lend money that your forefathers and mine were able to better their lives, open a mill, buy a few horses, buy a few cows, etc. Usury is the West. Money lending and capitalism created the West. And so again, we find out this left-wing anti-Semitism in those who blame the Jews for money lending. As a matter of fact, they weren't even the first. The Knights Templar were the first, and thereby hangs a tale. But let's just keep it to the context we're talking about. Those who criticize the Jews for money lending obviously show you how little they know about the origins of the West, and that even princely people borrowed money. But that gets back to the point of the pogroms. In many countries, and this is demonstrable by lots of proofs, Jewish people know this all too well because they were the people who were victimized by what I'm going to say next. All over Europe, from Italy to Russia to Germany to Britain, if you were consistently borrowing lots of money from these Jewish money lenders, and the point came where you had to, give it back or give your assets. Remember, because, some of these people were land rich, but they didn't have liquid cash. So they went to the Jewish money lenders and borrowed, lots of money. But when a point came where you couldn't pay it back, you raised a mob and you went and you burned them out. I think it was in Leicester, not too long ago, they found a well in which over 500 Jewish bodies were found. This is from the medieval period. They dug them up recently. A university found that there have been 500. That's just one instance of slaughter, where the entire Jewish population of the city was literally burned out and systematically murdered and their bodies dumped into a well. Jews have recorded hundreds of such events. And one of the reasons why this is because the rich who owned the money to the money lenders and didn't want to pay it back, this is especially the case in Portugal and Spain, would raise up a mob who would then spread some anti-Semitic nonsense about the Jews poisoning wells or stealing children or being involved in ritual murder or whatever, or they're being witches, the usual shit, right? And the mob, the thick, stupid-headed, shithead mob, would go and burn out these Jews and seize all their assets, and then the princely ones didn't have to pay it back. And this happened over and over and over and over again down through history. So the accusations of money lending are absolutely fatuous and wrong-headed. And people like Ayn Rand, who were, advocates of capitalism, and many, many others saw through this. And sadly, the Jewish punishments and the anti-Semitism that preceded it, because in order to burn the Jews out, you've got to first be spreading lies about them or taking some misdemeanors that they did do and then, blowing those up to kingdom come so that the mob will go and witch hunt them and wipe them out. So in the history of anti-Semitism, these are just a few anecdotes that I'm throwing into the mix. I'm not forcing people to believe this, but they can go and research it on their own so they can see this. And as I said, the most important anecdote of everything I've just said is the Templar rule. The Jews were not the first money lenders of any land. The Knights Templar were, and we can maybe explore that too. But I hope that explains some of the reasons why there are so many anti-Semitic groups, is because of they used to lend money. And then when you don't want to pay it back, it's very, very simple to just put a brick through their window and make some silly accusations about them and their religion and have them burned out. And this is what happened time and time again in almost every city in the world.
Where does Zionism fit in this picture?
Very closely to what I've just said. I'm glad you brought that up, Joel. Because I'll preview it by saying that although the Jews were persecuted quite widely, and particularly in Russia, because remember, most of the Jews who actually went to Israel, and bought the thing of Zionism, bought the mandate of Zionism, were from Russia. That needs to be borne in mind. But as badly as some of these Jews were persecuted in certain countries, they didn't want to listen to the Zionist leaders, people like Theodore Herzl and Chaim Weizmann and others, right? So they kind of resisted, and they listened to their rabbis. And to sum up this point, the rabbis were generally anti-Zionist. They said, look, some of us are for the principle of having Palestine because it's in the Bible. That was the homeland of, ancient Judea, remember, right? The 10 tribes of Israel and the 2 tribes of Judah. That's all our land.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for watching. To watch the full episode, head to hereforthetruth.com.
Smoking mirrors, I'm seeing through the illusion. Waking up in a time, they think you're in a delusion. Somebody set the alarms, cause they be too busy snoozing. I'm in a DeLorean. Fast forward in evolution.